Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My great pleasure to be aboard this beautiful ship with you to take this trip through the Mediterranean. And as I said in our introduction on deck the other day, Samuel Johnson wrote many centuries ago that it is the goal of all travelers to see the shores of the Mediterranean. And of course, when you come from the cold and foggy north, the Mediterranean is always a great pleasure. By introduction, I am a U.S. Coast Guard licensed master. I work on different ships and marine projects, and that then led me to being most interested in the life of the sea and of the shore, and to become an author, and then by good luck becoming a lecturer here for you. And I know many of you have already traveled a lot around the Mediterranean, but the great joy of the Mediterranean is that there's always more to see and find out about. It's certainly the sort of the epicenter of various cultures and civilizations, so everywhere we go there's more to see and do than we can keep up with, especially all those piles of rocks everywhere. Some of us went to Pompeii the other day, and I think they're adding more ruins as it goes on. Oh no, those are just the souvenir shops. You get them kind of confused after a while. By personal introduction, I say I live in New York State on a farm up near West Point, and then I work around the world as it happens. I worked for 9 years with Lindblad Travel, doing expeditionary travel. That led me to work in China, where I worked many years on the Yangtze River, which is a story unto itself. But I've also been around the Mediterranean quite a bit, and currently I'm working with a group called the Institute of Ecotechnics, which is based in London and New Mexico, my home state, where we have been running a research vessel, marine biology, and also now sociology. And the ship is currently in dry dock in Barcelona. And after this cruise, I'm going to go to Barcelona, and hopefully we'll get the ship back in the water. But it's like a fish. As soon as a ship gets out of water, it's hard to get it back in sometimes. But I'll tell you more about that. The other question, people are saying, where did I get this beard? Because my picture didn't have it. Well, I just grew it to try to imitate my colleague, Captain Phillips of the movie. So if they make a good sequel and Tom Hanks is too busy, maybe I'll get the part. And the other thing is, people notice I have a bad hand here. Well, I was working in the engine room last week, and sure enough, I hit a very hot part. Now I know how those steaks feel, but it's getting better. But it does remind me of the story of a ship where it goes to port, and the officers and the crew are having a drink, and they start arguing about who's the most important position on a ship. And the captain says, well, I'm running the ship. I know where we're going. And then the engineer says, well, without me, you don't have the engines. You won't get anywhere. And then the cook says, well, I'm the most important because if you guys don't eat, nothing happens. So they decide to trade places. And so there's the cook in the engine room, and they all call each other. How you doing down there, Cookie? He says, well, this engine's so hot, I think I'm going to cook in here. It's a lot quicker than the galley. And then the captain is called. He's in the kitchen in the galley. And he says, well, everything's okay, but it's so smoky in here, I can't see where I'm going, what I'm doing. How are you doing up on the bridge, the engineer? And he says, everything's fine. So the captain says, well, where are we? So the engineer answers, we're safe, we're aground. Anyway, on that note, let's go to Greece. Right? I'm sure some of you may have been here before, or to some of these islands, so I'm just going to just show you a few things about the Mediterranean in general, and then about these places where we're going specifically. So you know the great land, the ocean between the land, that's what the Mediterranean literally means. The Romans called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. The Egyptians called it the Green Sea because the water was so green around the mouth of the Nile. And of course, we're just taking the course through the central Tyrrhenian Sea, Ionian Sea, around to the Aegean, and then off to the Levant, and then back up to Athens right there. So we're encompassing a fairly small portion of it, but we get to see some of the most dramatic parts of it, especially right here. We went through the Straits of Messina. We'll go down around the Peloponnese right here and off to Santorini, and that's where Ephesus and the Turkish port Kusadasi is. And then we go all the way to Cyprus and to Israel and then back. This sea has had a very dramatic geological history because of the shifting of the continents. And it was once a complete dried out basin that had lost all of its water, what they call the Messian crisis, where the seas had dropped so much during one of the ice ages that the Mediterranean became a salt bed, just like the Great Salt Lake in Utah. The remnant of that, though, is the Dead Sea in Israel. And then during the Jurassic period, the sea started rising against it, and the Straits of Gibraltar were broken through, and then there was a sudden great flood that made the Mediterranean as we know it today. But for many millions of years, this was a land bridge from North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. And the first migrations of humans probably walked from Africa to Europe. And in those days, North Africa was a semi-tropical area, and the European continent was half covered in ice. And then as the ice receded, the seas rose, and then much of the primeval land of the Mediterranean has now been inundated, and of course the seas are still rising, which makes a big question for the future. In Greek mythology, it was said that Hercules, with his great cudgel, broke through Gibraltar, and then there was this great flood that happened. It may have been related, for instance, to the idea of Noah and the ark and the great flood then. These geological events sort of imprint themselves in various cultures in mythology and in religion. But for now, this Great Sea is sort of divided between the eastern portion and then the western portion. And that ridge continues to this day. It's very shallow between Sicily and Tunisia. Meaning it's only a few hundred meters deep. The deepest part of the Mediterranean is actually right off of where we are here in Puglia and Calabria. It's about over 4,000 meters deep right there. So there are trenches and continued volcanic activity, certainly. If you look at it this way, what the sea looks like, you have the Balearic Basin, Tyrrhenian Basin, that strait, and the shallows, various banks, various shoals. The Adriatic, for instance, is a recently created sea because of the rising seas. Similarly, the Black Sea was broken through and filled in. That was all land so many millions of years ago. And then the Aegean, where we're going, was also a hilly country with mountaintops, which have now become all of those thousands of islands that we go visit in Greece. This is all due to the tectonic plates. Our guide in Sicily said that Sicily is both going to the southeast and also to the northwest, so it's sort of right on the split of these various plates, and that's why Mount Etna and all this volcanic activity is around here. Similarly, there's the Levantine plate in various places made the Suez and the Red Sea, and though most of the volcanoes are right where we are in this area. So I just show this because we were right there, both up by Vesuvius, which is right around in there, and then Stromboli's about here, and then we have the subduction rolling right across Sicily, and then this area is very much prone to earthquake. Just last week, there was a 6.3 earthquake just off to the east of this illustration. We passed this mountain Stromboli in the night, which if you were up at about 3 in the morning, you could have seen its spray of lava that happens every 20 minutes. And people go there to just on an excursion vessel in the night just to watch the lava fountains, they call them. So this is the most active volcano currently. Etna bubbles, but it's not an explosive volcano. Vesuvius is fairly dormant these days. Now, the Mediterranean has a very complex quality because it is essentially a salt lake, which is very warm, and it evaporates its water so much that the Mediterranean is the saltiest sea in the world. It's also the warmest water, except for some tropical waters. And it has inflow from the various rivers, the Nile being the largest, but water coming in from the Black Sea and the rivers of the European coast fill it up as it evaporates. But what that leads to is that there's a net loss of water in the Mediterranean, and at the Straits of Gibraltar, there is a constant flow of about 3 knots of Atlantic water pouring into the Mediterranean, which keeps it fairly level and also tide-free. There's less than 1 meter of tide throughout the Mediterranean, which makes it very easy to handle boats along the shore, unlike some places where you know that you have tremendous tides. And so the Mediterranean is sort of a tranquil sea some of the time, but then the winds come down in the winter and are ferociously rough when the Bora and the Mistral and the Vardarak, different languages for it, blow across from the cold mountains down across the sea. And then in the summertime, you have the Sirocco and the Gibi and the Khamsin winds from the Sahara, which blow great clouds of dust, even all the way over to Greece, and sort of cook the islands in the summertime. This meant that the history of navigation was very much in training along the Mediterranean coast. And it's surmised that originally it was just coastal traveling. Eventually people went across the horizon and found their way. But Joseph Conrad wrote that seamen look upon the Mediterranean as one may look at a vast nursery in an old mansion where innumerable generations of his own people and sailors have learned to walk and sail. It has led mankind gently from headland to headland, from bay to bay, from island to island, out into the promise of worldwide oceans. And of course, it was the Phoenicians who first left from eastern Mediterranean and the Levant, and they put up colonies in Sicily and in Tunisia, where Carthage had its capital. And then they traded all the way out along the African coast and went all the way to the British Isles and around the northern European waters as the first true sea sailors. Now those winds they did have different names in different places. This is in Sorrento. I went into one of those ceramic shops and I saw this, and I was almost tempted to buy it to take home, except my bag is already too heavy from on arrival. So I leave it just for you to look at. But those are the cardinal points of winds in the Mediterranean that then became the standard on compasses. So what's called the wind rose on every compass that's made to this day has the winds of the Mediterranean imprinted on that 8 cardinal points. It comes on to this day for those who still use a compass. But the sea also has a great deal of mythology, as you're well aware, so I'll just show you a couple of the Roman and Greek tiles of this. Oceanus, who was the god of the sea, a son of Zeus, and his consort Tethys. And between them, they had innumerable offspring, which are the waves of the ocean. So every time you see surf, that's actually the offspring of this couple, Oceanus and Tethys. And then one of their other sons became the god of the sea. In Greek, it was Poseidon, and in Roman, it was Neptune. And so to this day, there's offerings made when ships are launched to Poseidon or Neptune, or whatever they'll call it, as the ruler of the sea, especially in the Mediterranean. If you've been north of Athens out to Attica Peninsula, there's the great Temple of Poseidon, Soignon, which is a classic Greek temple from the Golden Era. And that is right on a promontory, and it was where people would pray before they'd set off on an expedition. And also they keep a watch out for ships to come back. Most famously in the Oresteia, after Aristes had defeated the Minotaur, he came back, but he forgot to change his sail from black to white, and his father, king of Attica, thought that his son was dead and tossed him off the cliff there in one of the many Greek tragedies. And you can imagine back in the days of rowing and sailing and in different winds how long it took to get everywhere. So we have the luxury of traveling on a schedule, but back in those days it was sailors were a superstitious lot, and they were justifiably afraid of the sea. And the old saying, if you're not afraid of the sea, you should not be a sailor, because you cannot be careful enough. Back in the ancient times, until quite recently, the Mediterranean was just full of sea life. And so here's, again, some of the Roman versions of it, all of the different fishes and octopus and different things that were teeming in this warm, salty water. And in my work with this ship, unfortunately, we're going around and documenting the decline of the fisheries, the invasive species and things that are now threatening to make the Mediterranean the first truly dead ocean with almost no sea life at all in it. And one of my colleagues has been studying what they call the Vampire Algae, which is a deep sea import that came in somehow to the Mediterranean, has thrived, and it's the largest single-celled creature on Earth, grows up to 1 meter long, and if you chop it up, it just divides and spreads. So now they're importing a fish that tends to eat it in tropical waters to hope to ameliorate this particularly invasive species. But that's just an example of how mankind has changed the ocean, and in many ways not for better. Well, there's another part of this great story of the Mediterranean. We have all of these goddesses and tales and mythology, and of course my favorite here is Venus on the half-shell, Aphrodite in Greek. And so the life of humanity on this shore has been it's been a source of much of our culture. And you all know the story of Odysseus and his journey after the Trojan War. He tried to get back to his island and his wife Penelope, and he passed right through where we are in the Straits of Messina, and was, remember, he was tied to the mast while to listen to the sirens, who are the Scylla and Charybdis, who are actually great whirlpools, monsters in the water that would devour ships. But he wanted to hear the music that was being expressed by them, and so the sailors had wax in their ears. Meanwhile, he was tied to the mast and got to enjoy the nymphs and the naiads, they call them, in the water right here. Of course, we just steam right over them, and they don't bother us. But he was the first adventurer who, true or not, got to see some of these great sea creatures. And so between the dolphins and the mermaids and the naiads and the sea nymphs, this is part of the lore of the Mediterranean. And of course, you go on deck, particularly at sunset, you might see a few if you've had enough to drink at the bar. And of course, they're real. Here's one that was pressed into the Greek Navy to help get a ship off the ground there. And if you still don't believe me, it's in the movies. They got to be real. Well, here we are in the Aegean, which has these 100 major islands and then thousands of little islets, the largest being Crete down here. And the Peloponnese is actually connected by the Corinth land bridge, which has its great canal cut through it. And then we're going over near Samos to go to Kusadasi and Ephesus, and Santorini is right there. I think this is a little clearer. You see some of the different islands. Then we'll go to Rhodos, and then we'll come back to Crete, and then up to Athens, Piraeus, the great port there. And then if some of you may have been on the last cruise, I believe you went up to Istanbul, up through the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus there. Curiously, up there they have the same phenomena as in Gibraltar, where the fresher water is pouring from the Black Sea into the Sea of Marmara, which is that great arm of the Aegean past the city of Istanbul. And there's a subcurrent of heavier, salty water that flows underneath the outflow. And sometime in antiquity, some sailors figured that they could get up against the current by putting weights upon their sails and dropping them about 30 meters down into the water, and they would magically pull the boat against the current right up into the Black Sea, and then they could sail further. Similarly, at Gibraltar, submarines would ride the inflow on the surface, but they could ride the outflow on the subsurface. And so, for instance, German U-boats got away under the eyes of the British to get out just by going silently with the current. And that's just the phenomena of the hydrology of the Mediterranean. So here we have just a few of the different island groups. There's the Sporades, the Cyclades, and the Duodecades, which are the southern islands. And Crete is its own land on its own. I'll talk about that when we get near there. Here's a closer view. Then the Ionian Islands are to the west. Here we're going up near Samos to go to this Kusadasi. This is a fortress on the island that takes the name after what they call the bird island. It's sort of spread out like a bird's wings, and so that's the name of it in Turkish. This particular port was an ancient trading route. It was the end of the caravans across Asia Minor. It was the subject of many battles over many centuries between the Persians, the Greeks, then the Turks, and now it is a part of Turkey. But the reason why we're going there, of course, is to go up to Ephesus, we'll be at this modern port. Now, this town is south of Izmir and is mainly a resort town for the Turks from Istanbul, so it's very well developed. There's not much of historical interest in the town, except for some of the Ottoman fortifications and storerooms. But we will go there just to go up about 50 kilometers to the town of Ephesus, which used to be on the sea. It's on a river that has silted up, like a lot of these ancient towns in the Mediterranean, because of the extensive runoff from the land, erosion. They filled up the rivers, and the former harbor is now long gone. So Ephesus was on a broad plain by the Kiros River, and it was the site of a city that was at one time the third largest in all of the Aegean, and had been established by early Greeks, and then the Romans had it as their capital for all of Asia Minor. And so it was built with extensive Roman development, and that's what's mostly left. Then it's mostly famous also for its Christian heritage. So here's one of the Roman ruins, the Temple of Hadrian, named after the emperor, which is in fairly good condition with its friezes and porticos. A lot of this town was sacked during different wars and has had a bitter history because as an active commercial city, it declined so much and was so attacked by so many people that it was depopulated, and it did not exist until recent times. And now it's mostly just an archaeological site. There isn't much of a town near there. But it is famous for a number of its buildings. This is the library of Celsus, which named after a Roman emperor. And this was supposedly the largest library in all of Asia Minor, with tens of thousands of papyrus scrolls that were all lost again when the city was sacked at one point. Reading the history, there's like much of European history, it's hard to keep up with all of the conquerors and liberators and the subsequent fate of the city. Ephesus was unfortunately in a strategic location such that it was easily, it was a prize to be gained, and then it was a prize to be lost. It did not have the defenses of being an island. It was vulnerable on all sides. It once had a city wall. Here's the library again. Now this had all fallen down, has been reconstructed about 100 years ago. So this is part of the effort to both preserve and to return a little bit of the former glory to it. The architecture here is curious because you see as it goes up, and it had yet another floor above it, they believe, in the back, so that it looked larger than it actually was by the optical quality of the architecture. The largest temple in the world in the ancient times was this, the Temple of Artemis. Artemis is the Greek name for Diana, the goddess of the hunt and fertility. And this was a very vast temple that was very laden with riches at one point, and again was attacked and burned and sacked and then reconstructed, and then now it's mainly a field with just a few sorry columns. This is the grand boulevard to the Forum. As in Pompeii or other places we get to go, the classical Roman, Greco-Roman city will have a stadium, a forum, a temple, a market area, agora, these sort of features. And then in Ephesus, they've also excavated some of the old merchants' houses, which are characterized by this beautiful tile work. So if you're going there, you'll see plenty more of this, and they keep finding more. They think they've only excavated about 15% of the city at this point, but they can only maintain so much. It's like Pompeii. You excavate it, and then you have to maintain it. So a lot of the tile work and the frescoes have been taken now for preservation. But this is the greatest of the very early amphitheater. This amphitheater is said to hold up to 20,000 people, sort of like a football-sized stadium. But the question is, how loud did the actors have to be heard all up to the bleachers? Well, maybe they were louder back then than they even are now. Here's one of the entrances to the city. There used to be 3 main gates. This is the last one that is still standing, the Gate of Augustus, again named after the Roman emperor. But under this area, Alexander the Great had come by. Many other famous people had been there, including the Greek philosopher Heraclitus was born in Ephesus, and many famous writers and poets. But more famous, and why many people go to Ephesus, because of its Christian heritage. This is the tomb of St. John the Apostle, or the evangelist, who had spent his life traveling, setting up missions and preaching all through Asia Minor. St. Paul was also there and was briefly imprisoned before he then went to Crete, ended up in Sicily, finally was in Rome, and he wrote letters to the Ephesians, which are famous in the Bible, of course. There's also the house of Mary, which is reputedly to be where she lived out her last years, because Jesus said to John, take care of Mary. And when St. John went to live in Ephesus, it's thought that perhaps Mary went there. Now, of course, she has another tomb in Jerusalem, so she's covered her bases. But this is a site of holy worship, and 3 popes have come in the last century to pray at this house of Mary. I believe there's an excursion just to go see that. That's a bit outside of Ephesus. And here is St. Paul in a modern painting. We don't really have a likeness of him, but of course he was the greatest of the missionaries, and wrote the famous letters to the Ephesians to explain how the church will grow and thrive in spite of the persecution of the time. Now I'm going to come back after we've been in Kusadasi at Ephesus. We come to Santorini, or Thera is the formal name of this island. This is, I call it the jewel of the Aegean. Of course, there are many other islands with some scenery, but the site of this island is still just so remarkable. I've been there a couple of times, and it is one of the most unique islands on Earth. I think only comparable to Bora Bora or Staten Island or something like that. But it is the collapsed crater of a tremendous volcano that, when it exploded in 1628 BC, it blew up some 30 square kilometers of ash and smoke and covered the entire Middle East with it, and has been reputed to be the fall of the Minoan culture in Crete, which we'll go see in Knossos, and also impacted Egypt, and there's been recent speculation that the exodus from Egypt was caused by the days of darkness and the plagues that broke out because of this great natural disaster. That's much disputed by the scholars. I have no opinion, not doing any of the research, but you can see that it's actually a caldera, and it's up to 400 meters deep in the water, so it's very deep. And then there are the new plumes that are coming out, and this is called Kamini, and it's rising. It's not inhabited. It's actually hot and occasionally spews out. And then there's the fields. Notice there's a big airport there, so a lot of people come in there. It's not easy to get there by, when you land in a small vessel, it's sort of, you're just faced with cliffs everywhere. There's only one small landing where we'll go. But you can see it's populous, has agriculture there. It's very volcanic soil, so it's famous for particularly sweet tomatoes, and they grow a kind of a yellow eggplant that is so tender and sweet you can eat it raw like a carrot. But the population is about 30,000 people sort of clinging on this mountaintop. You can see that's not snow, those are houses. But the land is very rough. It seems like the volcano erupted just recently to make such a dramatic landscape. And then the quality of the geology means there are whole streaks of either white stone, black stone, or in this case red stone. So this is what's called the red beach, because the sand is all red. You might have seen today in Sicily here near Messina, all the beaches are black. So this is the result of the great volcanic activity. And so you can imagine rowing your boat around looking for a landing here, and you sort of wonder why people ended up living on this island, because it's truly living on the edge, and it could erupt again. It occasionally has some tremors, but no recent massive explosion. But this is where our ship will be anchored near there, and then we'll come and land. Now, then the question is, how do you get up there? There's the landing right there, and you can see a torturous bit of a hike up there. Those of us who climbed all the way to Mount Etna, we're ready for this, right? Well, no, they have buses even. And this is the capital of Stefani. And then all of the houses up on the cliffs are this classic Cycladian whitewash. They're stone houses covered with plaster, limestone plaster, but the stone that they make is the local pumice. And because it's full of a lot of air, they make very good insulation. So even in the summer and in the winter when it's colder, the houses are very comfortable. Now this is the old way to get up, and you can still do it if you have the back for it. Take a donkey up, and traditionally that's how they got everything around. And so it's a bit of a hike, but that's what donkeys like to do. Well, only if they are fed. So they still have those. You can go for a bit of a donkey ride, not really a stallion, but this is the other way to get up. How convenient. If only the ancient Greeks had those, they wouldn't have gone to war so much. So here is the center of the main city of town of Fidestefani. And so you can see that the houses just sort of step down and sort of huddle together, and they come down into the edge of the cliff. You can see a couple of swimming pools right there. This architecture has both that insulating quality that I mentioned, but also every house has cisterns. So whatever little rain falls on this island is collected and kept underground, and then it's the water source. And there's also storage for agricultural products and also some of the local wine they make. But this is such a dramatic place. It's truly a wonder of the world. Since I originally was born in New Mexico, this looks like a lot of the adobe pueblos that I remember that are also very ancient in New Mexico. But here they're this extremely bright white, which is dazzling. But of course it keeps the houses cool in the summertime. And then they have a lot of churches. And so blue and white, the national colors of Greece, are just everywhere, along with the colorful flowers that grow. Whether you're on tour or not, you can just go wander around in these houses. Now, of course, like much of these beautiful islands, they're not isolated, and there are a lot of visitors, and a lot of people have a home here, even though they live in Athens or elsewhere in Europe. But the sort of the surprising alleyways and staircases make this a particularly interesting town for Greece, especially. And this courtyard, they have some version of what they call the Cycladic style figures. Now this kind of a figure goes back about 3,000 years. And there's a museum in Athens that is dedicated just to the art of these islands, which have some of the earliest human representations, but they're remarkably plain and kind of evocative, and were an influence, for instance, on Picasso and modern art in later centuries. Then there are the churches, which are many Greek Orthodox churches with their campanile and walkways. This is a monastery at Petrios. So every village has its own. This is a beautiful Basilica Santa Athena. Now, that's sort of a merging of Christianity, because Athena was, of course, a Greek goddess, the greatest of the Greek goddesses, after which the capital was named, but also became a Christian saint, finally, in a different version. And this is in a village near Fira. But these are the sites that have spawned 1,000 marketing brochures and postcards. But it's real and it's true. Beautiful place, especially perched so high over the ocean. And there are a few of the windmills like you'll see in Mykonos. This is in the village of Oia. So there's still an agricultural economy there somewhat, though they, of course, with all the visitors, they have to import more food. All of these islands are desperately short of both water and then, of course, energy. So it's Greece is an expensive place to visit nowadays because of the general economy and the needs to feed and care for many visitors, not just the subsistence economy. Well, here's just to go back in history a bit. 1628 BC, when this tremendous volcanic eruption happened, it blew the center out of the crater. Just by studying the geology, they can sort of estimate where the land was before it became something different. And this was perhaps the source of doomsday, and this is a Doré illustration of the destruction of classical culture by volcanic activity. Later, it was taken by the Turks. It was gained, Santorini then became part of Greece with the War of Independence and the Treaty of London, 1830. Santorini then took on the name of the Saint Aegean, or Santorini in Greek, and then it was one of the islands that had constant trade. Their main trade actually was their very fine sweet wine that they keep in a cask up to 20 years to make it a dessert wine. Here's an illustration of one of the typical dress in the old days. And as you know, all through Greece, they have a traditional dress in all the different regions. And then there are Roman ruins, but in recent decades, they have dug up a site called Akrotiti, which is a Minoan cultural site that goes back over 3,000 years. This was buried in the ash of the Great Eruption, and then was found by a Greek archaeologist and then has been partially excavated. But it is the only example of Minoan culture that has been found outside of Crete itself. And so this was probably a trading center that was part of the Minoan sphere back then. And then as it was buried, like in Pompeii, it had houses collapsed and life suddenly stopped. And I don't know if they found any of the sort of dramatically charred people like they found at Pompeii, but they have a lot of amphora. But most famous are the frescoes that were on the houses. So these are, of course, wet plaster painted on with different illustrations of the life. And most famously, they have this saffron gatherers, which the petals of crocus were picked for saffron. And it is thought by some scholars that this saffron was actually a medicine for women, for menstrual cramps in particular. And so it was offered to young women during their puberty, and then it was served throughout their life if they needed it. This particular illustration is the most famous of all, the young fisherman with his catch of the day. And so we can see some of those there, though a lot of them, the finds have been removed to take to the National Museum in Athens. But this island is certainly the gem of the Aegean, and a place where one could stay for quite a while and gather the flavor of the past into the present. So I found this illustration of a winged griffin that was overlooking one of the outer islands, but she is welcoming you to stay on the island longer if you wish, and Triton will be there to greet you. So with that, I'm going to show you just a couple more islands in Greece, just for your interest. Here is one called Kythnos, which is what they call a polypleatis, which means it has a double beach. You see that arch beach, so depending on the time of day, you can go to one beach or the other. And then here's another one, Zakynthos, which has this kind of a sheltered little bay and an isolated beach where you can only get there by boat. And of course, a lot of the vegetation is gone. The tragedy of much of the Mediterranean is that it was very much deforested and became somewhat of a desert. Now, this part of the same thing happened, of course, to North Africa, but even Plato wrote back over 2,500 years ago that what is now left of our soil compared to what it was before is like the skeleton of an old man, and all the fat and soft earth having wasted away, and only the bare framework of the land left. Well, and these islands they're very barren, and but it gives them a certain rugged quality. Some are a little bit more lush than others. For instance, Scorpios has a fairly good cover. This was Aristotle Onassis' private island, and it has an airport and a marina and a chapel and a few other houses on it. And it recently was up for sale for 52 million euro. Anybody want to top that? 53? Do I hear 53 million? Anybody want to buy one? Well, you can buy one if you want. Now, this one's more of a bargain. This is called Pashoi, which is meant to be said to be the cudgel that Hercules used to break through the Straits of Gibraltar. Now, you can have that for a pile of rocks. But Santorini is definitely the most dramatic of all, and so I'll leave you with the little bit of the sunset, and I'll quote another traveler in the Mediterranean who said, where'd he go? The Mediterranean has the colors of a mackerel, changeable. You don't know if it is green or violet. You can't even say it's blue because the next moment the changing light has taken on a fringe of pink or gray. That was Vincent van Gogh in 1888 on his one vacation down to the Mediterranean. And I'll leave you with this last saying of Horace, which is, "Celo non animum mutat qui trans mare currunt," which means one who crosses the sea in a hurry cannot change one's soul. And that's why we're on a nice, slow ship. With that, I wish you bon voyage and see you on the next island. Thank you very much.